The official ideology of the RSS BJP is called Integral Humanism. Now, if you read the secondary literature about the RSS or BJP, you probably won't know that, because 90-something% of the publications about Hindu nationalism do not mention the official ideology, which is bizarre. You can't find any serious publication about the British Labour Party that doesn't mention socialism. But in the case of the Hindu nationalist parties, that is the done thing. In fact, they really make a great effort not to mention integral humanism and to leave you in the dark about this ideological choice. The reason is that integral humanism sounds too innocent. You see, practically everybody who writes about this has a one-point mission, which is to spread hate against the Hindu nationalists. And in that project, the name integral humanism doesn't fit very well, because it sounds so innocent. Who could be against integral humanism? And we want people to be against the Hindu nationalists. So definitely not integral humanism. So most writers never mention it. And yet they pass as experts. Okay, so let's talk about the contents of this ideology, integral humanism. First, the term integral humanism. In Hindi, in my days, it was called Ekatma Manavavad. Ekatma, meaning of oneself, integral. Manavavad, meaning humanism. Now, this suffix vada is a bit controversial. Vada means effectively what in Western languages is called an ism. For example, Samajvada literally means societyism, therefore socialism. Or Marxvada means Marxism. And the gossip has gained ground in India that there is something wrong with the word ism. Like among Hindus, it is commonly said, yeah, these ugly, vicious Westerners, you see, they call us Hinduism, but they are careful not to speak of Christianism, because you see, Christianity is something superior, whereas Hinduism emphasizes the fact that, you know, it's one particular viewpoint, that there is something sectarian, something provincial, something limited about it. Now, in fact, it is a mistake, you see. The word ism has a very general, neutral meaning. In some languages, this is used for Christianity, like in French, le christianisme. Conversely, in Victorian times or earlier, it was common to speak of Hindudom and not Hinduism. So there's much too much value is given to this suffix ism. Nevertheless, this has led to the strange situation that even the Hindi translation of ism is being avoided by Hindi speakers. And so nowadays I find that this Ekatma Manavavad is often replaced with Ekatma Manava Darshan. Darshan meaning viewpoint. Now it so happens that the Greek suffix isma is a later phonetic development from vidsma, from a root vid, which means to see, and which is the same root you find in vidya and veda. and so which means effectively viewpoint, which is the exact same meaning as darshana. So you see, to exchange vada for darshana really doesn't make a difference. Anyway, so that's a little terminological remark. So henceforth we will use the English term integral humanism. Now, this term was coined by Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, who for a while was the president of the Jan Sangh. The Jan Sangh, founded in 1951 by Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, and which is nowadays better known as the BJP. You see, during the emergency, the Jan Sangh as a party abolished itself and was absorbed in the Janata Party led by Morarji Desai that came to power in 1977. And then when the Janata Party again lost power and dissolved itself, the Jan Sangh was reconstituted as the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP. Now that still had integral humanism as its official ideology, though initially there was some wavering because they wanted to call their official ideology Gandhian socialism. This was the heyday of socialism, and so everybody who wanted to be with it called himself a socialist. But then you see others were attached to this integral humanism, and so finally they decided that Gandhian socialism and integral humanism meant the same thing, which is not unreasonable in the sense that while integral humanism had a certain ideological formulation, the notion of Gandhian socialism did not. It could mean anything, so it might just as well mean integral humanism. Okay, now integral humanism was at that time still a very young ideology. It was thought up in the early 60s by Deen Dayal. There are 4 lectures that have the status of its official formulation. They are brought together in a booklet that is now being read by practically all the members of the RSS and BJP, and called Integral Humanism. So it is a very real as an ideology in the sense that everybody is indoctrinated in it, so to speak. Everybody learns it, everybody interiorizes it. It is really the operative ideology of the RSS and BJP, which makes it really indefensible to ignore it in studies purporting to be about the RSS or BJP. Now, what does it say? Unfortunately, that is a bit disappointing. When you read the lectures by Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, not much new is being said. One thing that struck me at once is the naive dichotomy that is being made between Indian and Western. During the colonial period, the idea was developed that the West is materialist and India is spiritual. And to the East India Company, that was a very profitable idea because it meant that Indians wouldn't mind being exploited by Westerners. But in fact, that did no justice to India. India, of course, also has a very large material culture. Spiritualism has a certain place in Hindu civilization, but that's not all of it. And conversely, you see, it's understandable if Indians think so, because they don't know the West as it really is. But spiritualism has a place in Western civilization as well. Like, why do the missionaries come to India? Because they think their own religion is important and they want to share it with Indians. So, you see, even though the idea of what spirituality amounts to may be different, you see, it is present both in India and in the West, just as material culture is present both in India and in the West. Unfortunately, this idea of the West material, the East spiritual, can be found back in Swami Vivekananda, can be found back in Mahatma Gandhi, and can also be found back here in Deen Dayal Upadhyaya. So I think that is a pretty sloppy starting point. Anyway, then he goes on and defines something of a third way. You see, it was the heyday of communism. At the same time, capitalism was, of course, a well-known presence. And so Deen Dayal wanted to get between those two. He wanted people to have sharing, to have a social sense, like purportedly in socialism. At the same time, he wanted freedom and he wanted the economy to flourish and so on. So he didn't want to go for one of the two then existing poles. He wanted to have something in between. Now that is exactly as what happened within Christianity at the same time. You have an ideology in Europe called Christian democracy, which positions itself very similarly, which doesn't want to be too socialist nor too capitalist, but something in between, some compromise. But okay, I'm all for that compromise, as far as I'm concerned. So those were the 60s, now we have moved on. The details, you see, may not be so relevant for the present age anymore, but you get the idea. It is charting a third course in between capitalism and socialism. So far, so good. But then, far more attention than necessary is devoted to something that Deen Dayal calls chitti. Chitti is, for him, the translation of the national soul. It is, in fact, exactly what the German romantic nationalist from the 18th century, Johann Herder, called the Volksseele. Volksseele means nation's soul. Now, that notion, I think, is quite irrelevant to any serious political thinking. You see, if there was something wrong with communism in Russia or in China, it was not that communism conflicted with the Russian chitti or with the Chinese national soul. It was because communism was wrong, period. And it would have been wrong in any other nation with any other national soul. And so it's not very useful, but it fulfilled an important function in the ideological development of the Hindu movement. You see, in the beginning, the Hindu movement called itself Hindu. During the days of Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, there was no doubt about it that this was a Hindu party serving Hindu interests. Nowadays, in spite of everything that the secularists say about the BJP being Hindu fanatical and so on, in fact, the word Hindu is practically never used anymore. Some Hindu zealots nowadays speak of Indic, and the RSS itself speaks of Indian. And they completely blur the distinction between Hindu and Indian. They say that, in fact, Hindu means the same thing as Indian, and that every Indian is a Hindu. Muslims are Mohammedi Hindus, and Christians are Christy Hindus. Well, you see, that is a form of muddle thinking, of unclear thinking. You see, in this case, Hindu and Indian are very useful concepts. They are different. And nothing is gained by blurring the distinction. Moreover, it is very impolite to say that Muslims are in fact Mohammedi Hindus. You've never asked them, and I haven't heard of any Muslim who said, oh yes, we are Hindus. You see, can you imagine that Asaduddin Owaisi is going to say, yes, I am a Hindu, a Mohammedi Hindu, all right, but a Hindu? I don't think so. And so nothing is gained, but the concept of Chiti, here you can see what the concept of Chiti is good for. You see, if the ambassador in Brussels opens an exhibition about, well, showcasing Hindu art, it will not be called Hindu art. Or if it does, then the ambassador won't come to open it. It will be called Indian art. But effectively it means Hindu art. And so there is a certain basis in reality for confounding Indian and Hindu. It makes a certain sense. It's only when you start thinking it through that it doesn't work, that you come across difficult points like whether Muslims are Hindus. But so there is a certain commonality between Indian and Hindu. Now, what the word Chiti does is it says that India has a national soul, and that national soul, but that is not said explicitly, but you should understand that that national soul is Hindu. So, you know, you can hide the word Hindu behind the word Indian, and yet, through the concept of Chiti, still retain this Hindu thing. So that's quite clever, but I don't think it is good for clear thinking. So that's what he did with Chiti. Therefore, I must say that I am not too impressed with what integral humanism effectively stands for in the mind of Deen Dayal Upadhyaya. Effectively, where you get with Chiti is simply what secularists would call Hindu nationalism. You see, this Chiti is the same thing as the Volksseele, as the national soul, which is historically the core concept of European nationalism. And so when that nationalism emanates from Hindus, it makes sense to speak of Hindu nationalism. And so I would be somewhat understanding if secularists prefer the term Hindu nationalism to integral humanism, because ultimately integral humanism ends up meaning the same thing as Hindu nationalism, or at any rate nationalism. Maybe it's less Hindu nowadays and more Indian, but at any rate it is nationalism. And so I don't care for nationalism, honestly. However, that said, you see, I have a somewhat down-to-earth, sobering opinion about integral humanism as conceived by Deen Dayal Upadhyaya. Nevertheless, I think that it's a term of genius. The term integral humanism is just great. Now, maybe he didn't invent it himself. You see, that's a question of which I still don't have the answer. Did he invent it or not? Because in 1936, definitely before Dayal started writing, there was a book in France called Humanisme Intégral by Jacques Maritain. Now that book and generally the work by Jacques Maritain was in fact the wellspring of what after the war became the ideology of Christian democracy. And so that's a very important current which held power in the war-torn countries of Germany and Italy, as well as in Holland and Belgium. It was a trusted ally of the Americans during the Cold War. Anyway, so it was a very important political factor. And what made it very useful from the American viewpoint is that it managed to create stability, namely by its compromise between capitalism and socialism. You know what we spoke earlier of in the context of Dayal Upadhyaya, this idea of charting a third course in between those two. So that was already present in Jacques Maritain's mind in the 1930s. And indeed, there is a great similarity between the situation of France in the 1930s and that of India in the 1960s. In both cases, there was the rising wave of communism. In fact, the communists were in power in France for a few years in the 30s. There was also a militantly secularist regime, which in France was the Third Republic. So Catholics were very much on the defensive. And it is in that context that Maritain created his Integral Humanism. And it is in a very similar context that Dayal came up with his Integral Humanism. So if some Indian starts to research the private correspondence of Dayal and his associates, maybe some information will be thrown up that can decide this matter. Did Dayal know of this this concept by Jacques Maritain? Maybe not. I mean, the concept of humanism is not so not so esoteric. Anybody can think it up. The idea of integral, again, is fairly obvious. So he may not have borrowed it. Maybe he thought it up himself. Maybe other Indians did. Or maybe he did borrow it, but there's nothing against that, of course. You see, the concept that was useful, that was meaningful in France, was also meaningful in India. There's nothing against that. At any rate, by speaking of integral humanism, he put the BJP essentially on the right course. You see, that was an ideological way of affirming yourself, of not being on the defensive, of not saying, oh yeah, we have to have a bit of socialism, but yeah, we should also have a bit of capitalism. No, it meant affirming a third way, something independent from those two others. That is already good. And when you think it through, you see the concept of integral humanism amounts to a modern formulation of a concept that Hindus would know even better, namely dharma. You see, that precisely is dharma. You see, dharma has a religious component, but that precisely is what integral humanism is. You see, what animated Jacques Maritain was the realization that, okay, humanism was all over the place. It was a secular society that promoted humanism, which in those days meant non-religious. You see, it meant instead of directing yourself upwards to God, you should direct yourself to the world of men. You should put men at the center, and therefore humanism. Now, he said, well, a humanism that ignores the religious dimension of man is not an integral humanism. It leaves out an important dimension of man. So an integral humanism, as opposed to a reductionist humanism, is one that also gives a place to religion. Now that exactly was the position of the Hindus during the militantly secular regime of Nehru and Indira. That, you see, they are pretending that the religious aspect of Hinduism is something old-fashioned, something quaint, something that has to be abolished. And no, said Deen Dayal, that is in fact an integral part of human beings, of being human. So you see, that was a very correct insight. And so, you know, we can leave out the chitty stuff and the, I think, not so intelligent nationalist component of his ideology. The really important part is this integral humanism. You see, when you take the words serious, they mean a lot. And they mean something good. You see, effectively, there is no reason to be against it. Nobody can be against it. That's why the secularists try to pretend it isn't there. But so that, you see, I mean, people do all kinds of things, and they combine great things and smaller things in their lives. And so Deen Dayal was mediocre in some respects, but he was also a genius in this one respect. And so I think integral humanism is the answer. Thank you.